She used to be a low-status stripper. Every time, she just had to sway her body a few seductive times and could easily make a few $100. But she couldn't help falling for the son of a rich businessman. This unlikely, beautiful encounter became her fantasy of climbing the social ladder. Anora was a Russian immigrant in the US. To escape that label, she never used her real name in public. Instead, she picked a more American-sounding name, Annie. She was already used to moving among men, usually dancing in revealing outfits for customers. Even though Annie was a definite outsider, she loved money, and she actually enjoyed the work. One day, Ivan, a Russian trust fund kid, personally requested her. He wanted Annie, who knew a bit of Russian, to accompany him. Though Annie was reluctant at first, for the money, she had no choice. Though she was Russian, her spoken Russian was rusty, but luckily, her listening was still okay. A few simple lines were enough to get Ivan fired up. After a quick chat, Annie led Ivan to the room for their session. And this time, both were satisfied. Ivan was moved by Annie's passion and suggested a bold idea. The next day, Annie, in cheap heels, showed up at Ivan's mansion. It was her first time visiting a client like this, and she was a bit nervous. But when she saw the 3-story mansion, she couldn't help but smile. Excited, Annie rang the doorbell, and Ivan, who had been waiting, quickly opened the door. The moment she stepped in, Annie's worldview got another shock. Every bit of the luxurious interior screamed aristocracy. Even the air seemed soaked in wealth. Ivan, used to this, handed her a bottle of sparkling water, which was already the cheapest thing in the house. The bedroom on the second floor was even more over the top. With a full, unobstructed river view, Annie knew exactly, this was the life she wanted. Then they got straight to the main event of the day. In just a few minutes, the money was in her hands. Annie almost couldn't stop herself from laughing. Afterward, she asked and found out Ivan was only 21, 2 years younger than her. She couldn't help but wonder what exactly he did. He didn't hide anything.
Мой батя Николай Захаров.
Annie, who lived at the bottom of society, had no idea. When she checked her phone, she was shocked to see Ivan's father was actually the richest man in Russia. Annie told her friend, and they couldn't believe it. With a top client like this, if handled right, she'd never have to worry about money again. After that, Annie became Ivan's personal dancer. This time, Annie actively tried out new dance moves, but who knew Ivan would be done in just 10 minutes? Then Ivan invited her to an upcoming New Year's party. Even though she had to work that night, Ivan paid for her time anyway. That was ridiculously easy money, and Annie even felt a little guilty leaving work early. On party day, Annie brought her friend along. Her friend was stunned. She'd never seen a house this big. Ivan was used to both of their reactions. For Annie and her friend, this was the luxury life they dreamed of. After midnight, Ivan suggested Annie stay the night. After a night of partying, they slept until the next afternoon. Seeing Annie rush off to work was a bit of a buzzkill, so Ivan waved his hand and paid $15,000 for Annie to spend a week with him. With Ivan's massive order, Annie immediately asked her club boss for a week off. She didn't even care if the boss said yes or no, since working a month at the club wouldn't earn her $15,000. After letting her boss know, Annie went back to her apartment to pack, then followed the car back to Ivan's mansion. It was during these few days that Annie finally got a glimpse of a billionaire's lifestyle. Ivan's only job every day was to play. He didn't have to do anything. Tons of servants took care of everything. The garage was full of luxury cars, but he never drove them, they were just for show. Those so-called friends were basically just Russian immigrant workers, there for emotional value only, and Ivan covered all the expenses. Because someone casually mentioned wanting to visit Vegas, Ivan immediately chartered a plane straight to Las Vegas. At the casino, Ivan and his friends went straight to the reserved presidential suite. A table full of top-shelf liquor, thrown around freely. They played in the infinity pool however they wanted. When tired, they went to the underground casino and spent lavishly. Winning was luck, losing didn't matter. Their whole job was basically to push their bodies to the limit. When their bodies couldn't take it anymore, they called a therapist for care. This cycle repeated, and the week flew by. And Annie clearly wanted more. I wish shows like this would happen more often, but Ivan's heading back to Russia in just a few days. They don't know if they'll get to see each other again.
Well, I'm gonna miss you.
And will you miss me or my money, блядь?
Seeing Annie's indifferent look, Ivan didn't feel awkward at all. After all, this was a deal from the very beginning. Suddenly, Ivan changed the topic. He said if he got married here and became an American, he wouldn't have to go back to Russia. Ivan proposed to Annie right there on the bed. Annie just thought Ivan was joking, but who knew Ivan was getting more serious? Of course, Annie wasn't going to pass up the chance to marry into a wealthy family. Getting married in Las Vegas was easier than grocery shopping. They just picked some random church. The wedding was done in a few minutes. But Annie didn't realize what awaited her wasn't the life of a rich wife, but an unending nightmare. They ran to the streets, overwhelmed, sharing their wedding joy with passersby. Cinderella had suddenly turned into a princess. It was luckier than winning the lottery. The first thing Annie did when she got back to New York was quit her job. She hugged all her nightclub friends goodbye. As she left, Annie was still planning where to go for the honeymoon. Everyone was wishing Annie well. Only one person poured cold water on her. That was Annie's nemesis, Celine. Celine said a marriage like this would last at most 2 weeks. If it had been before, Annie would have been mad. But now the class gap between them was huge. Annie surprisingly acted generously and kissed Celine on the lips, which totally grossed Celine out. After that, Annie started living a dreamlike life. Her 3-carat diamond ring was finally on her ring finger. Annie was completely immersed in the fairy tale illusion.
But what was meant to come came.
Within a few days, news that Ivan married a prostitute reached Russia. The man responsible for keeping an eye on Ivan in the US got a call from Ivan's mother questioning him. Toros is Ivan's godfather. He had been acting as a guardian since Ivan was 6. He couldn't believe he'd been gone for just 2 weeks, and Ivan had already caused such a huge mess. He quickly sent 2 bodyguards to check things out. Meanwhile, aboard Ivan was home playing video games. The phone next to them wouldn't stop ringing, which gave Annie a bad feeling. She started wondering if Ivan had actually told his parents about their wedding. But he kept brushing it off with a half-hearted answer. By now, the bodyguards who got the orders had arrived at the villa's entrance. Although Ivan tried hard to stop them, his thin body couldn't hold off the 2 muscular guards. Once inside, they split up to handle things. One guard was tasked with watching Annie. The other was to check the marriage certificate. It wasn't until he saw the marriage certificate that he truly believed it was all real. He immediately took a photo and sent it to the godfather. The godfather then passed it on to Ivan's mother. Sure enough, Ivan's mother was furious. The godfather, scared, dropped his work and rushed to the mansion. Toros couldn't believe it. He'd just been gone for a short time, and Ivan had married a prostitute, even went off to Las Vegas on his own. When he heard his parents would arrive in the US by noon tomorrow, even the initially defiant Ivan panicked completely. Before Annie could go upstairs to put on pants, Ivan bolted out the door and sped away, leaving Annie alone in the mansion to face things. But Annie had never seen anything like this. She could only throw tantrums, trying to scare off the intruders. To control the crazed Annie, bodyguard Igor had to tie her up with a phone cord. But Annie kept trying to break free and accidentally busted the bodyguard's nose. Ita advised her to save her energy, since Ivan had already run, but Annie couldn't believe Ivan would leave her. She was even more convinced that Ivan had gone to fetch backup. 10 minutes later, the godfather arrived. Seeing the house in chaos and Ivan gone, Toros just had a massive headache and kept cursing. Meanwhile, Annie was still clueless. She still didn't understand why Ivan ran. She was clearly legally married, and now was being restrained like a criminal. Toros told Annie the marriage had to be annulled. Not a divorce, a direct annulment, with no room for negotiation. But Annie had finally gotten all this. How could she possibly give it up easily? She even tried to use pregnancy as an excuse. But the godfather told her to wake up a little. There's no Cinderella story in this world. A gold digger marrying a rich guy's son? These old stories are so cliché, even Toros is too lazy to make them up. But you can't wake someone who's pretending to sleep. Annie flashed her diamond ring to claim her territory. But as soon as she said it, the ring got snatched. Because everything here belongs to Ivan's dad, including that ring. Now Annie was left powerless. Her mental defenses were already shattered. All she could do was scream hysterically. That was her only weapon at the moment. But her mouth was quickly covered with a fancy scarf. Then Toros called the lawyer, asking to file for annulment tomorrow. After Annie calmed down, Toros started negotiating. If they annul the marriage, Annie would walk away with 10 grand and promise never to contact Ivan again. Otherwise, Ivan's parents could sue her for fraud. Annie said yes, but deep down, she wasn't ready to give up. She still wanted to talk to Ivan face to face. Even if his parents didn't agree, she wanted to see Ivan's side. Now both sides were on the same page. So the 3 guys and Annie hit the road to find Ivan. But finding someone in a huge city isn't exactly easy. After searching for a long time, they still had no leads. So they had no choice but to go around the streets, asking people one by one with a photo. From his buddy spots to the restaurant Ivan ate at, even the pool hall he loved as a kid, nothing. As night fell, the temperature dropped. Kind bodyguard Igor pulled out that red scarf, but Annie was too freaked out and refused. But the colder it got, the more her body betrayed her. Annie had no choice but to take the scarf and wrap it around her neck. In the NYC night, these workers were cold and hungry. Worse, their car almost got towed for illegal parking. Toros tried to bribe the tow truck driver. When that didn't work, he just drove the car off, leaving the tow guy yelling behind them. Finally, they got a lead at a nightclub, only to find out Ivan had left 20 minutes ago. Not only was he gone, but they got stuck with the bill. After all that, they still couldn't find him. Toros felt like he was done for. Just as Toros was about to give up, Annie got a message from a friend. Turns out Ivan was at the club where Annie used to work. Even on the run, the kid still knew how to enjoy himself. By the time they got to the club, Ivan was grinding with Celine in a room. Annie didn't care. She started complaining to Ivan. She naively thought that as long as she got Ivan's promise, everything would be fine. But Ivan was drunk out of his mind. He couldn't give her the answer she wanted. Toros just wanted to get Ivan out of there. But Annie kept pestering him for a promise. Deep down, she knew Ivan couldn't do anything now. But she was terrified of losing everything she had, and it made her act a little crazy. Celine's mocking completely pissed Annie off. And they started fighting, until the bodyguard pulled Annie away, ending the mess. Annie, bruised, was totally miserable. She wanted some comfort from Ivan, but he just slept through it, not caring at all. That's when Annie realized she'd been abandoned. Soon, Toros parked the car in front of the courthouse. Afraid of any more trouble, he decided to wait there. The next morning, they dragged the half-conscious Ivan into court. The judge looked at the plastered teenager, totally helpless. But hey, the kid had powerful backers. Just as the judge was about to annul the marriage, they realized the marriage happened in Las Vegas. According to the law, to annul it, they had to go back to Vegas. This court had no power to do it. Toros was dumbfounded. But he couldn't care about that now, because Ivan's parents were arriving, and Toros had to go greet them. Soon, Ivan's mom got off the plane. She didn't even look at Toros and strode straight into the hangar. Toros had no choice but to report to Ivan's dad. They had to go to Las Vegas. Annie finally met her mother-in-law, Galina, whom she had never seen before. She cautiously greeted her, using words she used to be too shy to say, saying she was honored to be Ivan's wife. But Galina thought Annie was a disgrace to the whole family. She looked Annie up and down, her eyes full of criticism and disdain. She thought Annie's Russian was absolutely terrible. Ivan didn't dare go against his mother. He could only obediently board the plane and go to Las Vegas to annul the marriage. Before getting on the plane, Annie kept trying to persuade Ivan to change his mind, but he remained completely cold. He only treated the marriage as a form of amusement. It shattered Annie's dignity. Even at that moment, she still wanted to save a bit of face. She even threatened to hire a lawyer to claim half of Ivan's assets. Obviously, they didn't take her seriously. Annie also knew the tricks of these rich people. So she could only obediently get on the plane and follow the plan. Upon arrival, Annie successfully signed the documents, annulling this ridiculous marriage. At this point, the bodyguard Igor couldn't help but speak a word of fairness. At least Ivan should apologize to Annie. But how could this arrogant family ever admit they were wrong? Afterward, Igor was assigned to take Annie back to the villa to get her things, then return her to her rental the next day, along with a $10,000 breakup fee he had promised her. They spent the last night in Ivan's mansion. Annie's emotions were clearly still unsettled. Igor tried to comfort her, but Annie shot him down every time. Because deep down, Annie believed they were not of the same class.
Who was he to comfort her?
The next day, Annie packed her bags. She followed Igor out of Ivan's villa. On the way back, Igor got her some money, then dropped Annie off at her doorstep. But before getting out of the car, Igor revealed the wedding ring. It was the one he had stolen back for Annie. Annie was shocked. She didn't know what to say. Her prejudice against Igor seemed to vanish. Annie didn't know how to repay him. Out of professional instinct, Annie straddled his lap. But when Igor tried to kiss her, Annie broke down, crying helplessly. And that's where the movie ends. When money, status and power intertwine into a cage, so-called romance is just a transaction. Anora wasn't the one being abandoned, she just finally woke up. Do you think true love still exists in the real world? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments.
See you next time, bye.